you'll recognise this. It's the colour wheel that we did much earlier on, and so the point of adjacent colours is that they are next to one another on the colour wheel, and we don't choose too many of them. We certainly don't choose more than half, any particular half. So you can choose what you like of maybe up to half. You may not even need as many as 6 segments, but see how you go. So for this drawing, to interpret this drawing of Steart marshes, I am going to choose lemon yellow, cadmium yellow, and yellow green, blue green, and cerulean and the blues. So I'm going to choose not more than that. So quite a limited bunch of colours, and I'm going to explore those mixes. For those of you who are more adept with colour mixing, you could include the relevant colours that you have in your set of colours. So, for instance, suppose you were going to do the Steart marshes one, you might look for the greens. Certainly, you might look for the greens. You might look for yellows, and you might look for blues that are alternatives to the ones in the colour chart. That's fine to do that. But keep an eye on the integrity of the colours that you're using together, how they work together. It's fun to kind of play mixes with colours taken straight from the set. They have a different quality. Sometimes the mixes sit together well, and a colour from the set might seem to jump a little bit because it may be more pure or more kind of a slightly different key somehow. So just be aware of that. Before I start doing the painting, I'm going to just go through, especially for you less experienced guys, I'm going to go through the mixes that might be possible from that those set of colours on the colour wheel. So I've got my water here. In fact, I've actually got 3 pots of water today, so that I don't have to jump up and clean my water pot. So I'm going to start with the colours next to one another on the colour wheel, which are the yellows. So we've got the lemon yellow or cadmium yellow pale, and we've got cadmium yellow. My cadmium yellow is running out. I have ordered some more, but it's getting a little bit on the empty side of that little pan. Then the blues are cerulean blue and ultramarine. So for the direct mixing of those, if we have cerulean blue and lemon yellow, we can mix a pretty good green from that. Quite a nice, bright, fresh shade of green. From the other two, you'll find that you can mix a lovely green. It's more muted. Of course, there's also the possibility of using cerulean blue and mixing it with cadmium yellow, getting a different sort of green again that way. And there's also the possibility of ultramarine and the lemon yellow, getting another kind of green from that mix. So you've got quite a lot of choice there. And not only that, but you also have the possibility of thinning down all these colours to, excuse me, you also have the possibility of thinning them down to get their various tints. Now, if I go over to my paint box and look at, say, the greens in my paint box, starting here, I have phyllocyanine green, which is a very strong dye-based, noisy, unnatural blue-green, vivid blue-green. I have Hooker's green, which can be really dark. It's quite a dull, dark green, transparent. Again, of course, I have these possibilities of thinning these colours down and using the tints as well.
Ross?
My next one in my box is
she can't hear
emerald green, which is again a very strong, bright green. Then I have oxide of chromium, which is a duller, softer green. And finally, I have sap green. Oh no, not sap green. I have olive green, which is quite a yellow green, but it's also got a hint of red in it, so it's quite a mossy, soft yellow green. So I've got all those choices if I want to reach for my paints. So you'll have different choices, but it's a good idea to get them out, have a look at them, and look at the tints and relate them to one another, so you can see the whole range of this this particular set of colours that you've got. Okay. So, coming on to drawing this out, I'm going to draw it all by eye quickly for you. Starting with, just to remind you of the drawing if you have it in front of you, there's quite a sort of strong V shape here between the grasses and the pond, and then there's a softer sort of edge here, and there are some rushes growing in the centre. So first of all, I'll start, I think, with this shape in the foreground here. There's a whole mixed bunch of different clumps of grasses and rushes here. So I could differentiate them a little bit with my pencil, but I'm certainly not going to do everything I see because I'm going to do that with my brush. So further back in the picture space, I'm going to start looking at these rushes, which are sort of dominating the middle ground of the painting, and just start to suggest those, place them where I want to put them. Again, without going into too much detail, just to sort of place where they are. Beside and beyond that, going back into the picture space, we have more rushes and grasses. We have this little reflection, and then the landscape just sort of softly disappearing in the distance there. So very quickly suggesting that. More fence posts. I'm not going to put any of the other details in. I can do that with my brush. The first thing that strikes me about this is that I've got this pool of water. There is a sense of gradation of the tone or the colour within it, and there's a little bit of a reflection. But first of all, I'm going to concern myself with the gradation of the water, and I'm going to do this in 2 stages for the less experienced to follow it. The more experienced might want to just put these in wet into damp at the same time as putting the colour of the water, but I'm going to divide those into 2 stages. So, just looking for a larger brush. Right. So I think I'm going to keep the colour wash simple here. I'm going to maybe use a little ultramarine. For the colour, shadowy colour in the water, and I could tint it with a very small amount of yellow, warm yellow, just to slightly green it up a little. So I've got my little pool of colour. It's not a very big pool of colour, but I don't think I need very much for this particular subject. What I do need is some clean water and to wet this whole surface so that I can do a little bit of blending the colour into the wet. So first of all, with the board flat, I'm just going to wet where the water is on this whole area with a big brush, clean water, going all around this area just to damp it. Using the tip of my brush to take the water where I want it to go, and using the flat of my brush to spread it. Okay, so it doesn't need to be flooded with water, just needs to be a little bit damp, just to soften the paper and to help the pigment to move a bit. So I'm going to turn it upside down now, and I'm going to put a little something underneath to angle the board about maybe 30 degrees, so 25 degrees. And I'm going to get my colour and I'm going to spread it on the surface. And it will run a little bit, I hope. And soften into the paint. If it runs too much, you can lower the gradient. If it's not running enough, you can try increasing the gradient. And also, with a little moisture, you can encourage it to flow. So we're just going to get a little bit of a graduated wash. It doesn't have to be an even one. Just get a little hint of the colour flowing down that surface to get a blend in the water. Now ideally that should be left to dry. I will get the hairdryer on it and just speed the whole process up. So here you are. For you guys who haven't done a graduated wash, that's just a little introduction into maybe having a go at that. And that is pretty much dry, but whilst it's drying some more, it's still a little bit cool. I'm going to go on and do some different parts of the painting. Okay. Maybe I'll start at the top here at the back. I think perhaps I'd like to use some purer, softer greens up there. So I'm going to start with my lemon yellow, and I'm going to perhaps get out a little bit of cerulean blue, and with just that amount on my brush, the blue, I've got a nice yellow green there, which I think perhaps I might use in the background of the painting. Perhaps this side. So I'm going to do a really simplified version of this drawing, just as an idea for you, just as a bit of a guide for you to perhaps spend a bit more time on it, develop it the way that you want, and get some ideas of your own going about it as well. So I think in the front here there are reeds and there's a bit more tone. I'm going to go for a warmer yellow and a little hint of ultramarine, just a little bit, and I'm going to use my tip of my brush just to strip that along a little bit and suggest those reeds there. So maybe here, because this is like a first wash of underpainting, which I'm going to develop with a few brush marks and a few other details and so on as we continue. So I've got one or two little details in the background there, perhaps some just a sense of hedges and so on in the distance. This seems like quite a good colour for my brushes, so I'm going to give it a go. Maybe I'll start with something a bit thinner, so I'm just diluting that same colour down a bit to get a little bit of a paler wash of that colour going first, and then I can add to it if I want to when I see what's happening. So put that down first. Gives me a sort of golden base to perhaps develop. Okay, so I'm using my really yellow a bit more strongly perhaps, and let's go into this a little bit more. Whilst it's wet, I'm just going wet into damp or wet into wet at the moment to give myself some soft sense of light and shade or different variation of the colour. I'm going to let that dry for a bit and then I'll come back and work on that again. But I think for now I'm going to look down here and ask myself where else I might perhaps use that colour or something similar. So that was my warm yellow and a little bit of ultramarine to give me quite a mossy sort of a green with a lot of red in it, because the warm yellow and the ultramarine, if you remember, they don't naturally make a bright green. They'll make a green with some red in it, because each of them has a little bit of tendency towards the warmer end of the spectrum too. So perhaps I'll start with this big chunk of grasses here. That muted colour. I'm going to go straight on and make a brighter green with lemon yellow or cadmium lemon and cerulean. And I'm going to put some of that over here. I'm putting down again sort of basic washes of colours so that I can develop something else on that. So, here. And mix it a bit more. Okay. Just here. So as we go back into the picture space, we want to try to get marks, maybe areas of colour a little bit smaller, closer together. I'm going to go back to almost pure yellow. Just put in a bit of slightly muted yellow green variety. There. And then perhaps that more murky green that I know I can mix from ultramarine and my warm yellow, my cadmium yellow, and make it quite a yellowish bias, I think. Let's see what that does. Yeah, that's really quite a murky green, isn't it? It's satisfyingly dark and ambiguous. So I'm really doing this without too much planning or forethought. I'm just responding. I'm just working quite quickly to try to give some variety here in the foreground and to suggest the undergrowth. So I'm using the same quite big brush at the moment to do some quite large textural marks in the same dark, bluey, mossy, dirty green. This is the darkest colour really that I can get from these four pigments. This is this mixture of ultramarine and cadmium yellow. So it's going to be useful. There's a little bit of grasses and weeds growing out of the water as well, so we can suggest those. Perhaps here I'll do one or two with the bigger brush and then come back and work with a smaller brush as well. But you get the idea. So I'm just using my brush to add texture to the foreground, and I'm now switching to a smaller brush. It's number 8, and I'm going to do something similar. I can use a bluer mix as well. It doesn't have to be so green. I can use, you know, quite a sort of strong on the ultramarine, so to get again more variety into it, more personality into the contrasts, more drama. And I'm really looking a lot at the photograph. You can't see my eye flicking back and forth, but my eye is really going to the photograph a lot, and not so much here. I'm letting my hand, obviously I'm keeping an eye on this, but I really need to respond to the photograph. And it's amazing how our visual memory is very short. We don't carry much information in our mind's eye, much detailed information. So we need to go back to the source of our subject matter as often, often, to make sure that we are actually not just inventing, but we are responding. So that our inventions are a result of our responses, not somehow something that's entirely kind of invented without observation. So, okay, got quite a nice lively foreground here. Maybe it's time I looked further up the picture now, and I think I'm going to have a go at that reflection before I go any further. And I think that the colour I'm going to need is probably something a little bit darker and duller than what I've got there. The reflections are tending to be, reflections are usually darker and duller anyway in water. And if the water is itself dirty, then that's exaggerated even more. So I'm going to use once again ultramarine and my warm yellow, but I'll have more of the warm yellow this time. And just thin it down. So that's waiting for me to use it. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to re-wet this surface with clean water. I'm re-wetting it just a little bit further out than I think I want my reflection to spread. So this is all dry now, so I don't need to worry about it running, but I want to re-wet that area. If I'm re-wetting over something that's already got pigment, I have to go very lightly so that I don't loosen that pigment. So just loosening, just wetting without loosening the pigment. So going over it only once. Now that's quite wet. Let me just show you the reflection. I can pick it up on the screen for you. Yes, there we are. So that's quite wet. So anything I do in that will run quite a long way. So I'm going to start cautiously up here by the base of the rushes, and we'll see how that colour spreads and what happens. So yeah, so just putting a little bit of colour there and letting it spread. And when I see how it spreads, and it will carry on spreading until that water has evaporated off, then I can see perhaps how far to go with the next stage, which may be, perhaps this brush is a bit too wide. Maybe I want a finer brush. Oh, there's a rigger here. That's a very fine brush. I could try using that. But you may not have a rigger, but you may have a finer brush that you can use. So let's just try one or two little marks. Yeah, can you see that spreading softly in the water? So I'm just going to add a few more. And they will keep moving. So once we've got enough here, we can get the hairdryer and dry it off. So that's given us a little bit of a reflection. We may want to come back and just deepen the edge, but I think first of all, it's going to be time to just do a little bit more to the reeds themselves. So I'm going to mix a nice tertiary yellowy green again, and my cadmium yellow, and my ultramarine. So a little bit of my ultramarine. And it's always a good idea to try colours out. You can try it here perhaps. So try colours out before you use them. So it's a good idea to do that. And then you can add a few stalks. And texture, especially perhaps down the bottom where it's the damp has darkened the base of these reeds. you know, just add whatever general texture you think you might want. Perhaps some little bits of the fluffy tops, just delicately hinted at. I'm doing it very quickly, obviously you can spend a bit more time getting beautiful fluffy tops. Reeds. And if you want to, here's another little trick. If you want to soften an edge of shadow, wash your brush out, dry it a bit on a cloth, and then take the damp brush down the edge, and you can just soften that a little bit, the edges of those sort of shadows between the groupings of the brushes. So there's just a little hint that you might do. Then, okay, so maybe with that colour I can just darken it a bit with my blue now, make my mucky dark blue, and add my little touches of my fence posts. And if I want to put the reflection in, I need to very much dilute that colour, and let's just suggest those in the water, and maybe at the same time suggesting some reflection of the bank, perhaps a similar kind of colour, something like that. So let's give us a hint of texture back there. I think the last thing I'd like to do might be the sky. Well, I'm allowed cerulean, aren't I? That's in the game. So I'm using some thin cerulean and it's going to drift it across. Again, I want that paler. I want it to come down to nothing. Just get some water on my brush and move it down with a little water. And I can always sharpen it up if I want hints of stronger colour there. Whilst it's wet, pop it in and it will soften by itself. So what else does this need? Oh yes, I think one more thing. Obviously it needs a few more rushes or reeds in the foreground to stick out into the water. So I'm going to use my rigger. You can use your finest brush to just draw a few tall reeds and some shorter ones, and perhaps a little bit of well, let me check some of them. Okay, I think I'll leave it there.